In the archives of the Royal Geographical Society in London, under the code RGS/JMS/1925, lies the final official document that became the starting point for one of the largest institutional investigations of the 20th century. This is a report, dated May 29, 1925, sent from a camp with the technical name Dead Horse Camp, located at coordinates 11 degrees 43 minutes south latitude and 54 degrees 35 minutes west longitude. The document was written by former Lieutenant Colonel of the British Artillery and active agent of the Cartographic Service, Percy Fawcett. This text, delivered by native couriers to the city of Cuiabá, contains not only a logistical report about the shortage of feed for 2 mules, but also an encrypted block intended for a narrow circle of investors from the North American Newspaper Alliance. The discovery of discrepancies between the expedition's official diary and Fawcett's private correspondence with the Harriman Syndicate indicates that the 1925 enterprise was not initially a classic scientific expedition. It was a covert commercial intelligence operation aimed at securing territorial rights to the undeveloped lands of Mato Grosso, amidst fierce competition with the Brazilian state structure SPI under the leadership of Marshal Rondon. Before we proceed to a detailed breakdown of this covert structure, an analysis of the ciphers, and the reasons for the group's demise, we ask you to subscribe to our channel to support the development of quality documentary content. To understand the mechanics of the conspiracy of silence surrounding this expedition, it is necessary to conduct a detailed deconstruction of the political context of the first quarter of the 20th century. The British Empire in the 1920s was experiencing a phase of hidden stagnation, requiring the search for new resource zones to compensate for colonial losses after the end of World War I, from 1914 to 1918. At the same time, the Brazilian Old Republic was in a state of permanent political crisis, following the Tenentista Rebellion of 1924, which significantly weakened the central government's control over peripheral states. The interaction between Fawcett and the British Foreign Office was of the nature of an implicit contract. As far back as the period from 1906 to 1913, Fawcett actively participated in demarcating borders between Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil as an official arbiter for the British Crown. This experience allowed him access to the closed cartographic archives of border commissions and to identify strategic zones rich in minerals, which were officially listed as blank spots on maps. The social composition of the 1925 expedition participants demonstrates a strict hierarchical segregation, uncharacteristic of open scientific missions. The core group consisted of only 3 people: Percy Fawcett himself, his eldest son Jack Fawcett, and the latter's close friend Raleigh Rimmel. The recruitment of young men without experience surviving in tropical conditions, but bound by ties of absolute family and personal loyalty, indicates the leadership's desire to minimize the risk of information leaks. An institutional audit shows that Fawcett deliberately refused the participation of professional scientists, geologists, or medics offered by the Royal Geographical Society. The inclusion of outsiders would have violated the secrecy system established by the contract with the North American Newspaper Alliance. This 1924 contract imposed on the participants an obligation not to disclose the true coordinates of the route under threat of legal prosecution and a fine of £10,000. Behind the rhetoric of searching for the cradle of an ancient civilization lay a precise economic calculation for the discovery of gold-bearing conglomerates and diamond deposits. the development rights to which were to be secured through British syndicates. The most important legal and ideological precedent that formed the methodological basis for the operation was the so-called Document 512, housed in the National Library of Rio de Janeiro. This manuscript, dated 1753 and written by a Portuguese bandeirante expedition under the command of Francisco Raposo, was meticulously analyzed by Fawcett as part of his archival research work between 1910 and 1920. From a paleographic standpoint, Document 512 is a report on the search for abandoned silver mines. However, Fawcett interpreted it as evidence of an autonomous urban center, which he provisionally named the City of Z. A historical paleographic analysis shows that the root of Fawcett's methodological errors lay in his specific approach to interpreting Portuguese colonial documents. Manuscript 512, titled Historical Narrative of an Unknown and Large Settlement Devoid of Inhabitants, which was discovered in the year 1753, is written in archaic Portuguese using numerous abbreviations characteristic of 18th-century scribes. While studying this document in Rio de Janeiro, Fawcett ignored the fact that the text was replete with clichés from chivalric romances and Portuguese folklore about the lost mines of Muribeca. Instead of conducting a critical textual analysis, he applied a method of literal reading, extrapolating the described classical arches, majestic two-story houses, wide streets, and hieroglyphic inscriptions copied by the bandeirantes from ruined temples onto the actual geography of the Serra do Sincorá and the Xingu River basin. Foreign Office documents indicate that Fawcett used these conclusions to convince investors that the region concealed not just remnants of temporary settlements, but a structured, Mediterranean-type civilization whose technological achievements could surpass contemporary ones. Such rhetoric enabled him to attract funds bypassing official scientific funding channels, which demanded strict academic justification. The inclusion of mystical and theosophical theories, which Fawcett gleaned from correspondence with leaders of Hermetic orders in London and the works of Helena Blavatsky, served as a smokescreen, concealing the commercial and geopolitical nature of the enterprise from Brazilian customs and border authorities. The expedition's financial flows came from three main sources: Fawcett's personal savings, a targeted grant of £250 from the Royal Geographical Society, and advance payments from newspaper corporations for exclusive reports, totaling approximately £4,000. These funds were distributed through accounts at the London bank Coutts & Co. and used to purchase high-precision equipment, including Troughton and Sims, theodolites, chronometers, and shortwave radios, which ultimately were never utilized to their full capacity on the route. By entering into an agreement with the North American Newspaper Alliance, Fawcett essentially transferred the rights to his biography and research results to a consortium of 18 American and European newspapers, including London's Daily Mail. The terms of the contract were unprecedented for geographic discoveries of that time. Fawcett was obligated to keep detailed diaries and transmit copies every 2 to 3 weeks through a network of trusted contacts in Cuiabá for subsequent telegraphic transmission to New York and London. In return, the syndicate paid fixed sums, which were allocated for the maintenance of his wife, Nina Fawcett, and for the procurement of logistical supplies. This agreement created a profound contradiction between the scientific objective and commercial obligations. To maintain reader and investor interest, Fawcett was forced to dramatize his reports, consciously exaggerating the dangers of the route while simultaneously concealing the group's true geographical position. In letters sent on May 20, 1925, he indicates his intention to completely sever contact with the outside world after passing the Bakairi post, to prevent the interception of information by competitors, specifically French and German research groups. This decision, approved by the syndicate's leadership to create the media effect of disappearing into the darkness, ultimately blocked the possibility of conducting a timely rescue operation when the group encountered critical difficulties. An analysis of the Nana financial reports for 1925 to 1926 shows that even after news from Fawcett ceased, the syndicate continued to extract enormous commercial profit by publishing speculative articles and selling reprint rights to the explorers' old diaries, yielding a net profit exceeding the initial cost of the expedition by 3 times. The operational mechanics of the Fawcett Group were based on the principles of rigid single command and strict secrecy. The system of transmitting orders excluded any discussion. The group's internal regulations, recorded in Jack Fawcett's diary entries, demanded unquestioning obedience to the expedition leader. Information security was ensured by the use of an alphanumeric cipher for telegrams sent from Cuiabá. Each key geographical feature and landmark was assigned a 3-digit numeric code, preventing data interception by Brazilian authorities or competing researchers, such as Dr. Alexander Rice, who was financed by American capital. The expedition's logistical plan envisioned movement along a route divided into 4 phases. Phase 1 began on April 20, 1925, when the group left Cuiabá, heading northeast through the indigenous Bakairi post, officially named Posto Simões Lopes. At this point, the group employed 2 local guides and 3 mule drivers hired under a contract that expired at Dead Horse Camp. The logistical supply manifests record that the cargo was distributed between 2 mules and 3 horses. Each animal carried up to 45 kilograms of cargo, including 60 kilograms of pemmican, 40 kilograms of dried vegetables, 20 liters of medical alcohol, 3 Mauser 1904 model hunting rifles with 900 cartridges, as well as specialized waterproof clothing made of rubberized fabric. Phase 2 involved entering territory not controlled by the Brazilian government, inhabited by the Cuicuro and Kalapalo tribes. The timing of the movements was strictly tied to the dry season. The group had to cover an average of 15 to 20 kilometers per day to reach the interfluvial area between the Xingu and Tapajós rivers before the onset of the autumn rains in 1925. Meetings and coordination with couriers occurred at strictly designated points. Fawcett used a system of marking the route with notches on trees in the shape of arrows with numerical indices indicating the number of days' travel to the next campsite. This system, however, had a critical flaw. It was susceptible to decryption by local ethnic groups, who viewed the appearance of armed strangers as a direct threat to their security. From 1906 to 1924, Fawcett led 7 expeditions into the regions of Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil, during which he developed his own doctrine of autonomous survival. This doctrine was based on the complete rejection of large expeditionary parties, which, in Fawcett's view, inevitably led to logistical collapse, desertion, and the rapid depletion of supplies. He argued that a small group of 3 to 4 people could move unnoticed by hostile tribes and sustain themselves through hunting and gathering. However, this approach completely ignored the specifics of the central Amazonian biocoinosis, where game density is extremely low, and endemic diseases can incapacitate a person within 5 days. Institutional documents and personal correspondence of the participants point to a growing internal crisis within the group long before its final destination. Raleigh Rimmel, chosen by Jack Fawcett as a companion, lacked the necessary physical and psychological resilience. From Percy Fawcett's letters sent from Cuiabá, it becomes known that even at the initial stage of the overland route, Rimmel suffered from severe tropical ulcers caused by bites from ticks of the genus Amblyomma and a subsequent leishmaniasis infection. Rimmel's lameness and his inability to withstand the standard daily tubu load of 20 kilometers led to the disruption of the entire operation's timeline. Entries in Jack Fawcett's field notebook indicate the emergence of severe conflicts between his father and Rimmel. Percy Fawcett, raised in the traditions of the late 19th century British military school, demanded unconditional adherence to marching orders, despite the subordinate's physical condition. Fawcett Sr.'s refusal to turn back or leave the ill Rimmel at one of the intermediate native settlements attests to his fanatical fixation on the ultimate goal. In conditions of complete isolation, this led to the group splitting into factions. Jack Fawcett came to the defense of his friend, which violated the basic principle of unified command upon which the entire expedition's mechanics were built. Thus, by the time they reached Dead Horse Camp on May 29, 1925, the group was in a state of profound exhaustion, with minimal medical supplies and a shattered internal command structure. An important vector of the investigation is the position of the Brazilian authorities and their special services regarding British activity in Mato Grosso. The Brazilian government, represented by the Indian Protection Service, SPI, under the leadership of Marshal Rondon, pursued a sovereign policy of integrating the country's interior regions as part of a large-scale state program, the March to the West. Rondon, a convinced statist, built an extensive network of observation posts and telegraph lines cutting through the jungle from Cuiabá to the borders with Bolivia. The SPI doctrine was based on establishing peaceful contacts with the native population and an absolute prohibition on the use of firearms against Indians. Fawcett, in contrast, adhered to harsh colonial methods of interaction, viewing the local population either as unskilled labor or as a direct threat, requiring an immediate demonstration of force. Archival reports from Brazilian liaison officers in the Xingu region for 1924 to 1925 record numerous complaints from tribal chiefs about the actions of foreign explorers who confiscated food without adequate monetary or trade compensation and blatantly violated the boundaries of sacred tribal territories. There is a high probability that the demise of the Fawcett group was a direct result of a defensive reaction by the Kalapalo or Cuicuro tribe to an attempted forcible incursion through their lands. Brazilian archival documents from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs contain a secret 1926 memorandum stating that Fawcett's unauthorized actions caused direct damage to Brazil's international prestige, as they created a false impression of the absence of legitimate state authority in these territories. In this context, the Brazilian authorities were not interested in the success of the British mission and deliberately sabotaged the first requests from the British Diplomatic Corps to conduct large-scale search operations, citing the unstable political situation in the state of Mato Grosso following the suppression of military mutinies in 1924. A critical audit of the 1925 expedition's failure requires a detailed analysis of sources and the identification of systemic contradictions in witness testimonies. The official version, broadcast by the Royal Geographical Society for decades, claimed that the group's demise resulted from a sudden attack by hostile nomadic tribes. However, a cross-examination of SPI archival materials and reports from subsequent rescue expeditions reveals a completely different picture. In 1928, a rescue expedition led by Albert de Winton and later a group led by George Dyott recorded clear signs of deliberate misinformation from local inhabitants. The interrogation protocols of the Kalapalo tribe elders compiled by Dyott contain internal logical contradictions. In the first version of the answer, given in June 1928, it was claimed that Fawcett and his companions safely departed eastward, taking food supplies for a 5-day journey, and were eliminated by the Suya tribe. In the second version, recorded 3 months later under direct pressure from Brazilian investigators, it was claimed that all 3 participants were physically suppressed directly in the camp due to systematic disrespect for local religious taboos and refusal to share hunting trophies. An analysis of these testimonies points to a high probability of an external political or commercial order to eliminate witnesses in order to conceal the true results of their topographic survey. The Brazilian state machine, in the person of Marshal Rondon, was systematically working to expel foreign concessions from the Mato Grosso region, and the liquidation of Fawcett could have served as a convenient pretext for closing off the region. Reports from the Brazilian secret police in 1926 contain mentions of the detention of 2 British subjects in the border zone, whose parameters match the description of Fawcett's group members, but these documents break off at the stage of their transfer to Cuiabá. An additional factor in the failure was Fawcett's own logistical error. An analysis of equipment inventories shows that the load weight per mule exceeded the norm by 25 kilograms, leading to a rapid loss of traction and the forced abandonment of high-precision equipment, including radio communication means and geodetic instruments, even before passing Dead Horse Camp. This completely deprived the group of the ability to coordinate its actions with the external agent network. As part of an institutional analysis, it is necessary to consider the version of Fawcett's conscious withdrawal from civilization to create a closed utopian community, which is often classified as a conspiracy theory, but has certain documentary markers in the family's personal archives. In Nina Fawcett's papers, drafts of her husband's letters dated 1923 to 1924 were discovered, which discuss in detail the concept of the Great White Brotherhood. Fawcett was deeply integrated into London's theosophical circles and shared ideas about the cyclic change of races. According to this version, the real goal of the 1925 expedition was not a geographical discovery, but the logistical support for transferring a selected group of individuals to found a religious political colony in an inaccessible area of Mato Grosso. Jack Fawcett, according to this scheme, was considered a medium or messiah of a new historical era. An analysis of passenger manifests of ships arriving at the port of Rio de Janeiro in the first half of 1925 shows the arrival of 4 individuals closely associated with the London Theosophical Society, whose roots within Brazil completely break off in Cuiabá in May of that same year. However, this version runs into hard economic counter-arguments. Fawcett's group did not have with them a sufficient quantity of agricultural tools, seeds, or long-term food supplies to create an autonomous settlement. The total weight of their equipment was less than 300 kilograms, which completely ruled out the possibility of a group of more than 3 people surviving for several years without external support. Records of financial transactions in Fawcett's accounts after 1925 also show no movement of capital, which indicates a complete cessation of their economic activity and makes the version of intentional isolation unlikely due to the absence of supporting banking or logistical documents. An analysis of subsequent rescue and research operations reveals a complex network of falsifications and deliberate distortions of facts created around this case by various groups of interested parties. In 1928, the Royal Geographical Society sanctioned an expedition under the command of George Diott. An analysis of Diott's financial reports and personal diary shows that his main task was to create a controlled media product to minimize reputational losses for the British Crown and satisfy the demands of insurance companies. Diott announced that he had found irrefutable evidence of Fawcett's liquidation by the Anakua tribe of Indians, based on the discovery of one brass tag with Fawcett's surname at the tribe's campsite. However, paleographic and material analysis of this artifact, conducted by independent experts in 1934, showed that this item belonged to the equipment of Fawcett's earlier 1920 expedition and was left by him as a gift to local guides. The testimonies of Indians, collected by Diott and in subsequent years by Albert de Winton and Stefan Ratin, differ drastically in details. Ratin, a Brazilian trapper, stated under oath at the British consulate in São Paulo in 1932 that he personally saw an elderly white man held captive by a tribe of Indians in the region of the Mortes River. This interrogation protocol contains numerous geographical inconsistencies and chronological distortions, indicating Ratin's attempt to secure substantial funding for a fictitious rescue operation. In 1951, one of the founders of the Xingu National Park, Orlando Villas Boas, as part of a state program for the integration of Indians, announced receiving a confession from elders of the Kalapalo tribe, who admitted to the physical suppression of Fawcett and indicated the location of his remains. The bones were exhumed and sent for comprehensive anthropological examination to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in London. The official report by Professor William Rust, dated 1952, unequivocally established that the skeleton's height, age, and anatomical characteristics completely did not match Percy Fawcett's parameters. This proves that the Kalapalo tribe, under pressure from researchers and government officials, committed fraud by passing off the remains of one of their own tribesmen as the bones of the British officer, in order to stop the constant interrogations and visits from armed expeditions that were disrupting their way of life. The institutional consequences of the Fawcett Group's disappearance manifested in an avalanche-like growth of unauthorized search enterprises, which led to significant human casualties and required the direct intervention of the legal systems of several states. From 1926 to 1935, 13 official and private rescue parties were dispatched to the Xingu River Basin region. The total number of participants in these groups exceeded 150 people. Due to the lack of centralized command, detailed maps, and an adequate understanding of the logistics of tropical treks, these enterprises demonstrated extremely low efficiency. Albert de Winton's 1930 expedition ended with the complete cessation of its leader's existence as a result of a clash with the Xinguano ethnic group. The financial costs of these search operations, partially covered by charitable collections organized by the British press and the personal funds of the Fawcett family, amounted to the colossal sum for those times of £25,000 sterling. The documentary epilogue of this case records large-scale changes in the legal and administrative regulation of geographical research at the international level. In 1932, by Decree No. 21,134 of the Brazilian government, a complete restriction was introduced on the access of private foreign expeditions to the country's interior regions without special permission from the Supreme Council of National Security and the Ministry of Defense. All archives of the Indian Protection Service pertaining to the Fawcett case, including the original transcripts of native interrogations and the internal correspondence of Marshal Rondon, were classified and transferred for storage to the Archive of the General Staff of the Brazilian Armed Forces in Rio de Janeiro, where they remain inaccessible to independent researchers due to national security restrictions. The inventory of the Fawcett party's property, officially recognized as lost or confiscated by the Brazilian authorities based on the 1926 inventory, includes 1 Troughton and Sims theodolite, 2 Longines pocket chronometers, 3 Mauser hunting rifles, 1 shortwave transmitter, as well as personal diaries and field maps with a total value of £1,200 sterling. The only verified artifact returned from the jungle was Percy Fawcett's silver signet ring with the family crest, discovered in 1979 in a pawn shop in the city of Cuiabá. Expert analysis revealed that the ring had changed hands among local fur traders since the early 1930s, confirming the fact of looting at the site of the party's disappearance. The legal status of the expedition members remained undetermined for decades. Only in 1936, after the expiration of the 11-year period since the last official contact, did the High Court of Justice in London, based on a petition from Nina Fawcett and an official conclusion from the Royal Geographical Society, rule to recognize the fact of the cessation of existence of Percy Fawcett, Jack Fawcett, and Raleigh Rymel. Their remaining property was transferred into trust management for the heirs. This court ruling set an important legal precedent in British civil law, establishing standards for recognizing the cessation of existence of persons missing during scientific and colonial expeditions outside the Empire's jurisdiction. The transformation of the legal landscape led to the international scientific community completely abandoning the practice of funding small autonomous groups without constant radio communication and state escort, thereby ending the era of unregulated private incursions into the interiors of sovereign states.